If anyone is not comfortable with recording, just pop a message in the chat, and you can always take yourself off the video, mute, anything you need to do. All right. Okay, so welcome to Advocacy 101. Thank you guys so much for coming, and like I said, thank you for bearing with me through the introduction. Like I said, I am Trinity. I am the Conservation Advocacy Specialist for Loud and Wildlife Conservancy. And before we get started with the actual presentation, I just wanted kind of to give a little bit of an overview about our organization in general. I heard that some of you guys might not be super familiar with us or might be new. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about our mission, our vision, and the reasons that we do the things that we do. So Loud and Wildlife Conservancy's mission is to inspire, motivate, and engage people to protect, preserve, and restore wildlife habitat, which is one of the big reasons that we are starting this series. We are a membership-based and volunteer-driven nonprofit, so we are always looking for support, membership, involvement, all around that wheelhouse. If you are not currently involved with Loud and Wildlife Conservancy and are interested in becoming a member or interested in getting involved further, please reach out to me or one of the other Loud and Wildlife Conservancy staff, and we will be happy to help you with that. So without further ado, I will go ahead and get started with Advocacy 101 session number 1. What is advocacy? All right. Okay. So I just realized you guys can see yourselves. There we go. So our goal with this series is to educate our community on how to effectively practice advocacy, especially in pursuit of the goal of protecting wildlife. The series is going along the lines of also helping Loud and Wildlife Conservancy achieve the goals of our strategic plan. Most notably, the efforts to serve as a knowledge leader and partner for wildlife stewardship, to inspire and engage people to come involved in the natural world, and to advocate for the advancement of wildlife and habitat conservation. So just to kind of give you guys a little bit of an overview of what this series is going to look like, now you know what our aim for taking it on and getting it out there is. So we are planning on this being, as of right now, a monthly series that will be held on the last Wednesday of the month. We may switch to bi-monthly a little ways down the line, but as of right now, the dates that we have set out through the end of the year, we have our preliminary topics set out. Today, like I said, is just what is advocacy. So we're just going to do an overview, general understanding, and then we're going to actually kind of get into some more specifics about advocacy that will actually help you guys and the general public engage with advocacy work, especially that advocacy work that Loud and Wildlife Conservancy is doing ourselves. So like I said, the next session, we're going to actually be going into detail about the development process. I know that that was something that a lot of you guys expressed your reasoning around. That will be held on October 26th, same time, virtual. And then the next one we're going to be doing for the last one of the year is November 30th, going on about describing the zoning ordinance and what you guys can do to help with regard to that. And then we have our upcoming topics for the following year, going about writing to your supervisor and about public speaking. And then we have a couple more preliminary topics in the works, including loud and power sector, intersectional advocacy, and environmental justice. So obviously we're getting out to what the whole point of the session is. What is advocacy? Defined pretty simply, advocacy is public support for or recommendation of a particular cause or policy. Very simply defined. I found just a little video that kind of explains it a little bit more concisely. So I'm going to play that for you guys really quickly. I hope you guys can hear. If you cannot, I will pop the link in the chat and you can watch it a little bit later.
Yeah, Trinity, I'm not hearing that on my end.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you for letting me know. I am not entirely sure. It looks like I'm already on computer audio, so this may just be my speakers not cooperating properly. So I'll just really quickly pop the link in the chat and you guys can watch it later if you'd like. It's nothing that is more than what I'm going to end up saying anyway, but it's just another viewpoint that I thought explained it pretty concisely. So I'm just going to really quickly, pop this in the chat for you guys to watch on your own time. All right. Okay, so back to the presentation. So, now getting into the weeds of advocacy a little bit more. Now that you guys maybe have a little bit of an understanding about just advocacy in a very general, defined sense. Just to give you a more thorough understanding, I want to talk about the ways that advocacy can be practiced. So first step in advocacy is always learning about the problem. Familiarizing yourself with the given issue, and the intricacies around it, the complexities of it, the context of the situation, really, really important. And that is always should be the first step when you are undertaking any kind of advocacy around a cause. Knowing the ins and outs of the problem, knowing it like the back of your hand, so that way you can convey that information accurately. What are the possible repercussions of outcomes of a certain decision or course of action that is going to be undertaken as a result of the advocacy work that you are doing? What are all the possible outcomes that could happen when you are talking about what you are trying to achieve? Be that something that's going to go the way that you want it to, or the way that you're not going to want it to. And what are these repercussions, especially in regard to your area of focus? So for wildlife conservancy, obviously that would be the impacts, repercussions to wildlife specifically. And then after you kind of have that background information, you start narrowing in on what the ideal outcome is. And that way you can kind of gear your focus towards advocating, convincing, and persuading towards that outcome being undertaken. And then educating and engaging are the next parts in the advocacy process. They kind of go hand in hand. Educating obviously just revolves around teaching others about the problem, and engaging involves around finding other people who care and raising your voices together to achieve the outcome that you are aiming for. Excuse me. So educating your community is super important on everything that you learn during that first step of the process. That should always be one of the paramount points when you are educating, is making sure that you yourself are as familiar with the topic as you can be. And then when you are doing that educating of your community, you start taking notice of who in particular is taking more interest in that specific issue, and start harnessing the passion of that individual, motivating them, inspiring them, and engaging them to take action to help you win your cause. And then going hand in hand with that is also seeking out specific stakeholders that may help you influence the decision or course of action towards your goal specifically. So finding those who have sway that can kind of gear things in favor of your goal. So like I said, that last part on the last slide is talking about engagement. Community engagement in and of itself is the keystone of advocacy work. This may seem straightforward and obvious, but it cannot be honed in anymore. It is always going to be the most important thing. The more voices you have, the louder they are. More people does equal more power. You want to try to inspire passion with everything that you say. You want to make it known how dire a certain situation is and really why you're advocating on behalf of, in our case, these wildlife and individual creatures, but you never want to make it seem like it's a lost cause. Whenever you are doing any kind of advocacy campaign, it is never too far gone if you are still in the mindset that you want to take that on. As the fact of the matter is, with regard to that, is that instilling hope and building up confidence in one person's individual ability to make change is the most paramount thing to remember when you're doing community engagement and advocacy. So to kind of give you guys a little overview, just to help you along in the process when you're doing advocacy work and you're communicating about advocacy to your peers, to your community members about a specific issue that you might be passionate about in particular. What I have learned from my background in grassroots fundraising and grassroots advocacy is taking individuals on what we call the emotional roller coaster. The emotional roller coaster talks about how to really hone in on being personable. You want to try to use a tone and convey the information in a way that is going to resonate with the other individual on a really personal level. And that's how you get people excited and caring about your cause that you are advocating for. So the emotional roller coaster is, I'm gonna just verbalize it. I can absolutely send you guys a graphic later, but you don't want to see me try to draw right now. So I'm just gonna talk to you about it. So the emotional roller coaster, the way you kind of talk about it is you start up, if you're thinking about you're just taking off from roller coaster, kind of on a level ground. And you're just talking about the context of the situation. So the context of the situation, why you're talking about the situation. So that is the information and implications around the issue that you are advocating about, as well as your individual stake in it. So this is where you really want to hone in on why you care, but more specifically who you are. So just making sure that you are really being personable when you're talking to another person about your cause, and making sure that that person knows that you on a very personal level are caring about it. So if you guys are advocating for something on behalf of Flood and Wildlife Conservancy, this is where you want to hone in on our organization's vision and mission and why we are doing what we're doing. So then after you take off from the roller coaster, that's when you're going to hit your first hill. So you're taking off from the roller coaster and you're going to hit your first hill, so you're going to start going down. And when you go down, this is when you start conveying what the issue is. You want to use a tone that has an inflection that shows that this is a dire situation. Whatever it is that you're talking about, it really does matter, and it has potentially very negative impact to the thing that you just talked about, how you care about so much. So this is where you're going to talk about what that very specific issue or problem is, and you want to convey it in a tone that may be a little bit like you're going down the roller coaster hill. So then after you've gone down the roller coaster hill, you want to bring the person that you're speaking to back up. So after you've gone down, you want to come back up, and you're going to talking about what the solution of the particular issue is. So this is where, like said before, when you're doing your learning about the issue, that you want to know what the possible courses of action are, what the possible outcomes are, and what you can actually do to influence that outcome. So this is when you're coming back up out of the roller coaster dip. I really want to start emphasizing that there is something that can be done to actually keep this potentially bad thing from happening. And this is how we do those things. So you want to give actionable results that the individual person can take on to help you achieve a goal that will keep you out of that negative hill of the emotional roller coaster. And then kind of just to dive it home, or to drive it home, after you are coming back up from that solution, we are talking about the actual results, you want to reinforce that by talking about past successes that we have had, that you have had, that advocacy, environmentalism, wildlife rehabilitation in general has had. So that way you can really instill, like said before, that concept of hope and belief in the individual to actually make an impact on a given outcome. I mean, you want to talk about previous successes that you've had where you have really advocated before and have actually seen good results in whatever capacity that may be. And then the last thing is just making your ask to the other individual to get them involved in whatever you are trying to do. So that is how you're going to get that community engagement actually involved with your specific advocacy campaign or whatever it is that you personally care about. You make that ask at the end of that roller coaster, and oftentimes that personal connection that you established with the person throughout this process will oftentimes lead to them helping you with your cause. And that is how you build that community support over a period of time, over several interactions with large groups of community members. So, the last part of community engagement after you've done that engagement is actually taking those actionable results. Like I said, this is the upward part of that emotional roller coaster, is making your voice heard. Excuse me. Making your voice heard can happen in a variety of ways. With regard to the work that Loud and Wildlife does specifically, I just wanted to go over some of our primary strategies for engagement and actually enacting some of those advocacy practices. So the first one is writing. This can be in the form of, like I said, submitting comments, writing your elected official. I know one of you had talked about previously having letter formats that we send out, always really helpful. This can come along with commenting specifically during public comment periods when the public is invited to comment with regard to the development process specifically. There's always a time period when the community is invited to give their input on a particular development project before a decision is made. This may also come to emailing and writing letters to elected officials and staff correspondents or other key stakeholders. And this obviously can come at any point in the development process or otherwise. And then the last one is with regard to writing, is sending out mailers. And this kind of goes along with that education and engagement aspect of advocacy. Is just kind of helping you get your word out there, gathering more support so that you can involve more people in those other avenues for practicing advocacy in a written manner, as well as in the other ones that I'm about to delineate. So second most widely practiced advocacy method is orally, so speaking to people, essentially. So that is going to go along with speaking at public hearings, business meetings, etc. This is talking directly to elected officials, potentially setting up meetings with key stakeholders. And the reason that the oral element I emphasize here rather than just lumping it in with writing is to really emphasize the importance of in-person, face-to-face interactions. I know during COVID and during these trying times, it's really difficult to make that happen. But even speaking, if you are having to do it through a screen, face-to-face over Zoom, is still really helpful. But doing those in-person reactions just makes it so much easier and more effective when you're really trying to emphasize and personalize your cause. It really is easier to be personable in general and cater to a certain individual when you are seeing them in person or face to face. And that is one of the reasons that those oral statements that are given at public hearings or business meetings or on those one-on-one meetings with stakeholders are actually the ones that oftentimes tend to be the most impactful, because you're seeing them on a personal level, kind of going back to, like I was saying before, with that emotional roller coaster of engaging your community in advocacy. Same goes for when you're actually influencing those decisions, those in-person interactions, when you are really able to hone in on your point and drive it home with all the passion that you have in your entire body language and facial expressions, etc. It really, really, really does help. Third avenue for making your voice heard also helps be driven by writing and oral, and also helps you to have an opportunity to have those in-person interactions or events. And this is a really general way to put it. They can be anything from an open house that's just an educational measure to a protest. This is how you're really going to actually hone in on the engagement of the community. We're going to continue to spread the word and gather that support for your cause by involving people in hands-on events that emphasize the importance of your issue, that really give examples to why this problem matters. And then the value in your specific subject of interest as well. For wildlife specifically, this is regarding the inherent value that it has in and of itself, and also the utilitarian value potentially of a particular animal or species or ecosystem or community member in general. These can also be hosting educational events that maybe help promote voices in your community, maybe those that are marginalized or not as often prevalent in your community, to help you guys really drive those points home. And these might be something, like I said, like an open house or a Q&A session, something like that. You can also, as an example of events, hosting writing or commenting sessions that encourage participation in the writing and oral elements of making your voice heard, and also help emphasize camaraderie around the issue. So like I said, really emphasizing that teamwork element that helps people feel unified in the cause. For wildlife environmental issues, these often come as something that Florida Wildlife Conservancy is very familiar with, hosting events that engage people with the focal point of what you are trying to do, the focal point of protection, such as our bird walks, our nature walks, our field trips, and such like that. And then the last point for making your voice heard, key elements of this sector of advocacy work is finding common ground. You are not always, almost times, often, not going to have the exact same vision as those who are making the decision when you are advocating for a particular decision to be made. And the key thing to remember when you are really trying to influence that is actually finding common ground. Achieving an advocacy goal comes by convincing others that your ideal outcome benefits them in whatever manner this may be. Even if they don't necessarily share your reasoning for why one particular course of action is best, you can always find a reason why it will work for them. That's where the advocacy really happens, is in finding those compromises and finding that common ground and utilizing all of the tools at your disposal to make that happen. So using those writing elements, those written comments, those oral elements, speaking at public hearings, as well as those educational events and protests as well. So I know I just threw a lot at you of very conceptual things, but I did want to see if we could do our best to kind of hone this in and give you guys a little bit more of a concrete understanding of it by using some definitive examples. So I am going to invite Michael to speak for a little while about how Wild and Wildlife Conservancy in particular practices advocacy, talking about challenges and successes and how we as an organization have really enacted this theoretical framework that I have just explained to you guys. So I'm going to stop my share and give the floor to him.
Great. Well, you could leave that slide up or not leave it up. That's fine. Thank you, Trinity. And so, as Trinity mentioned, how do we practice advocacy, and getting back to learning and familiarizing yourself with the issue, educating and teaching others about the problem, and then engaging and finding others who care to raise their voices. So I want to start with some of the successes we've had over the past year plus, and kind of how they came about, which kind of these lessons are woven into there. So one of the ones most recently where we were pleased with the outcome was the Scott Jenkins Park decision. And that was one where, for those of you who are not familiar, the county's Parks and Rec Department wanted to add lighting to some ball fields outside of Hamilton. However, when the park was originally proposed and approved, there was a stipulation and a condition of approval that lights would be prohibited at that park due to a variety of factors. Not only there's a greenhouse across the way, but on one side of the road, on the other side of the road, there's a large parcel that's under conservation easement, in part due to the dark skies. When this came back around, those residents who fought it the first time reached out to us, and they're like, we're concerned. There's this application that's looking to put lights on these ball fields. We've already fought this once. Can you help us? And obviously, if you all attended our annual meeting, our keynote speaker was talking about bird collisions, and part of that was due to lights and lighting. So light pollution is a topic that we at Loud and Wildlife are looking to get more involved with, and all of its impacts on insect populations, bird migrations, et cetera. So what we did is, we learned about the issue because of residents, and oftentimes that's what gets things on our advocacy radar screen, is our membership or volunteers come to us. Hey, we heard about this. We see this happening in my community. What can be done? And so from there, it is a learning process. We're a small organization. Our power and strength is in our numbers, but we have to learn the issues, learn what's going on. And so, I learned a lot about light pollution, more than I knew it at a very high level, but getting down to that more granular level, what does it really mean? And then there's planning meetings, and working with other nonprofit partners, but working within the residents. And so that's a big component, is that engaging, educating others about the issues. And so that works on multiple levels. One, it's educating the public. So we're educating our members about something that we're concerned about as an organization, but those neighbors and individuals, they're educating their neighbors about their concern, and saying, hey, we share this concern, and then turning around and trying to educate the decision makers. So with the development process, that's why we're going to have a whole nother session on the development process, because it's long and complicated, but there's multiple opportunities to reach out and try to make some changes before it even gets to the public hearings. And so trying to navigate all of those points so you can educate decision makers at multiple points along the way. So hopefully these applications can either be modified to something that is acceptable, or if it never does get modified, then we'll push back and ask for people to deny them. In this particular case, we were able to have, multiple people came out during those public comment periods and spoke. And in the end, the supervisors did, they actually withdrew the application. So they didn't vote against their own application, but there was a lot of questions about the process on how this got so far down the road. when most of the comments from the public who spoke out against it. And at the end of the day, it's the people like all of you in the room and engaging and reaching out to your supervisors or decision makers, whomever it may be. The strength in numbers and having those facts to back it up, that's what really matters. In this particular case, it was based more on that condition of approval to the prohibited lighting rather than all of the other facts and evidence about the negative impacts to wildlife. And so from our perspective, there's a lot more education that needs to be done. And you'll see there's a common theme of that in a lot of these both successes and challenges. So at the end of the day, we did achieve the result we were looking for, but there's still a lot of education that needs to be done, and there's a lack of knowledge among the general public, but also the supervisors and decision makers. And that's something where the supervisors will be the first people to acknowledge, whether it's the county supervisors or state legislators or federal legislators. They don't know all these topics. Like, we're the experts. We're looked at as the experts, and they're looking to us to educate them about what are the pros and cons and what are our concerns that we see. Another topic that went how we were hoping it would go was the Short Hill Mountain. There was a proposal to put a cell phone tower at the top of Short Hill Mountain. Recently, again, other groups, we mobilized together as we got the facts. We pushed on it. You want contiguous habitat and connective habitat along our ridge lines. That's why in our county zoning ordinance, these pole, like large structures and towers on ridge lines are prohibited per the zoning ordinance. So it's a pretty big ask for, in this case, it was AT&T was wanting to put it there. They already have a facility there. There was a lot of nuance, then pushback, and a lot of facts and figures, a lot of figures thrown out there. But the bottom line is the zoning ordinance prohibits it. And at the end of the day, that was something that carried the vote, where the supervisors just weren't comfortable with it. It's in the zoning ordinance for a reason. But at the same time, why that was able to carry the day is because not only ourselves, but other nonprofit partners, we were able to engage our membership, and our members were able to reach out en masse to contact supervisors and say, hey, you really need to abide by the zoning ordinance on this one. Like, this is an important thing. This would set a terrible precedent and compromise potentially all of our ridge lines, not just the ones on Short Hill Mountain. And that's something when we're looking at what advocacy topics do we tend to get engaged with. We're protecting trees, we're protecting water and clean water, we're protecting riparian areas and streams. So those are, and we're trying to get into other issues such as light pollution being one of them. We have a fairly limited capacity, but that's also why we hired Trinity to increase our capacity, be able to hopefully comment on more topics, but also do more public education around this. And so when with that, the Short Hill Mountain decision, again, en masse people reached out, we're able to influence that decision. The last example of a success I want to touch on tonight is the Goose Creek Overlook application, which for those of you who don't know, it's right across, it's right on Goose Creek, and it's right across from the True North data center, which was one of our challenges. But that particular parcel, they wanted to really increase the density of housing and put in townhomes. They'd have to do some blasting right along the scenic river that is Goose Creek. The county does own the parcel right next to it. It would have been a good connection and provide some good connectivity for the linear parks and trails and the Emerald Ribbons concept. But at the end of the day, that increased density and those scenic impacts to the view shed along Goose Creek and all those impacts to potentially clean water and our riparian areas, we felt were too much. And that was a topic that was on our radar screen, but then one of the residents who lived in that area reached out and was like, we need to do more on this. Like, we need your help. And so we were able to, again, there was multiple nonprofit partners got involved, but at the same time, it was those individual neighbors getting their neighbors involved. And that's where the real inertia came behind it. Because we as organizations, we do a couple different things. One is we try to learn about the issues. And that's one thing that why we're here is we want to also get more people and more volunteers involved to help us with throughout this process. So when you learn about it, there's a lot of work behind the scenes where we're reading the documents, understanding what they're actually trying to do, understanding like what are the issues, how can we base our arguments in fact and science to be the underpinning for those emotional connections that Trinity was talking about. Because at the end of the day, you can have all the facts in the world, you can have all the logic in the world, but if you can't make that emotional connection, you're not going to change anybody's mind, and it's going to fall. You're going to fall flat. But telling those emotional connections and getting more people involved, and those people telling their personal stories is supremely impactful. So on that particular project, there was a lot of people who spoke out in terms of tactics. There's the variety of tactics. There's written comments, there's oral comments, there's also events. So like with the Goose Creek Overlook, people were speaking out, people were writing letters to the editor, and then that event, there was a protest. And that came from the citizens and the neighbors organized this protest and got a large group of people to show up outside of the government center. And so this one was a particularly interesting application because originally they approved it, and it's right on the edge of 3 supervisors' districts. So oftentimes it's like one supervisor's district, and they, other supervisors will defer to the supervisor in that district. But this particular one, where it was located, was on the boundary of 3 districts. So there's a lot of supervisors who had skin in the game, so to speak. And they initially approved it, and there was so much public outcry that I think I got the timeline a little mixed up. So after they approved it, before the next supervisors meeting, I believe is when the protest was held, and there were so many people that came out, and there was a push even after that initial vote in the press, and people were outraged at this decision. And it was then that the supervisors asked to reconsider the vote, the supervisor whose district it was in, because, and that's all about knowing the process. So that's where we come in. Like, we know the process, like what can be done, like, because even after the vote, is there still something that can be done? And the answer is yes. And it proved in this case where that public outcry to a decision was so loud that the supervisor had a heart-to-heart with himself, and he was like, looked in the mirror, and at the end of the day, he's like, I need to listen to my constituents. Like, I think this is a good idea. The applicant did everything that we asked them to do. Like, we made a lot of compromises, we did this, we did that. But at the end of the day, his constituents still didn't like what was going to be happening. And they raised their voices loud and clear, so much so that being on a person who voted for it, he could bring it back at the very next board meeting. And that's what he did. He took that upon himself. That is, I will admit, it's super rare, but it is something that can be done. And it happened in this situation, and they ended up reversing their vote. And then at the end of the day, in that particular parcel, Loudoun County actually just purchased most of it. They just, on one of their agendas, they approved to be able to purchase it. So it still has some steps to go. But Loudoun County, instead of like having that parcel be developed, they're going to purchase it. And then they'll still be able to do their linear park and trail connection. They'll be able to do all the things that protect the wildlife and protect that habitat and protect the scenic view shed without all that high density development. So from our perspective, that's a win-win. And it was really, again, it was that testament to the public and the public engaging, educating their neighbors, educating the supervisors, and then engaging people and bringing them out. And it really, all of those, like, how do you make your voice heard? That particular one had all of those elements. And that's where you can really see some of these actions galvanized together, is when you take a little bit of all of those elements. And something as we as an organization, we also work behind the scenes where we're not on the front lines of some things that happens and gets done, and we don't even take the credit for it, but we're feeding members of the public information, and feeding them that knowledge and education and how the system works, and really trying to gauge, like, does our presence help or hurt the situation? Getting out in front of it. And that's something where the more you get involved in advocacy, and as we break down some of these other topics and other future Advocacy 101 sessions, we'll get some more into those nuances of the whole process and writing and how to communicate with your supervisors and all of that, because it's a skill. But at the end of the day, it's being personable and telling that personal story, because that passion and those personal stories, you can see it on, like, whether it's a planning commissioner or a supervisor's face. Like, when you're telling that story, they feel you, and it makes a difference. And as Trinity was mentioned, that's why in-person stuff can be so impactful. Of course, there's also still challenges. We face decisions that we don't necessarily agree with all the time, unfortunately. And being an activist, it can get really disheartening at times, where you keep just churning out decisions where you're like, we're just like Sisyphus, and we're just pushing boulders up hills, and like it's tough and can be disheartening. Like, one example is the Route 15 North widening project, which is still ongoing. But that's a decision where we mobilized our people. We had people writing to supervisors. We were like taking the surveys, the public surveys, were pointing in the directions that we were hoping for. We were feeding information to the decision makers and county staff, and participating actively in the process. And then at the end of the day, the supervisor still made a decision that we don't necessarily agree with. But it's not over yet, because that's going to be a very long process. And at the same time, it's also a lesson too, where we mobilize people and we got people to write letters and speak. But when it came before the Board of Supervisors, the people who were sort of on the other side of the issue, they were able to mobilize their neighbors, and they had more people in the room. And even though they were a minority in the public survey that the county did, they were very loud and they were very obnoxious about it. And that's something where, from a moral perspective, we will always take the moral high ground. We're based in fact and science and logic and reasoning and defending the planet. Like, we're defending wildlife and healthy habitats and clean water. So I honestly believe 1,000% we're always right. We're doing the good work, and we're doing the morally good work that's based in fact and science. But at the end of the day, those emotional arguments can ride the day and take the day, unfortunately. And that's something where, how do we make those connections? How can we get better at this? How can we engage more members of our community to reach out and speak out? And that's part of why we're here, is how can we mobilize? How can we get more people involved with our advocacy efforts with our team? That's something that Trinity's working on, is getting a whole team of volunteers to engage on all these different steps, whatever level that you're comfortable with. There's behind the scenes work you can do. There's in front of the scenes work that you can do. There's stuff that can be roles for anyone who wants to be engaged. I'll close out with another application that was full of challenges as well, and that was Bless Park. If you're all in the room here, you've probably received our communications about Bless Park. It was something that we really pushed back on, and that's something that we were alerted to it because somebody saw an alert in the paper. They're like, oh, they're having a public input session about improvements to Bless Park, and somebody's like, I need to go to that. Or they were like, one of our people was like, can you go to this? And one of our board members attended, and they're like, Michael, we have a problem. And so we started educating ourselves, like, what are they really trying to do here? What is really necessary here? And then learning the nuance, and then participating in the process, and then actively engaging the public. And so we engaged the public. There were a lot of improvements that the county wanted to make to that park and put in their master plan. They did take some of them out. They did listen to us on some of them. On some of the others, they're like, well, we'll see what happens. And unfortunately, some of our bigger concerns were left in that plan. But at the same time, there were things that were taken out. And again, it's one of those things where some elements haven't been funded yet. So in that particular application, is a master plan that approved, yes, they can do these things if they have funding. So they will need to go back before the supervisors to do some of them. Some of the elements, that particular application it's happening in multiple phases. But that's one where, again, we educated ourselves, we educated the decision makers, we educated our membership. Our members did come together, like spoke out in mass at many of the public opportunities, public comment opportunities. And there were some really like gut-wrenching stories, like the people were making those emotional connections and you could see it. And one of them happened at the Planning Commission, where a father and son who had attended one of our bird walks on Father's Day, and his son is off at college and he's studying, environmental science. And he came back and they were at the public hearing and weren't planning on speaking. And then his son got up and was like, I wasn't planning on speaking. And he told this story about this connection at our bird walk at that park. And then his father was like, I wasn't going to speak, but then my son spoke and he was telling it from his side of the story. And then so you had like two sides of the same story about this special connection that this father and son had at a bird walk at this place because it's such a great natural area. And like all of those people on that dais, like they have children. They want to connect with their children. They have connections with their children. And that special moment, utilizing that place, had an impact. And the Planning Commission, that vote actually, the Planning Commission recommended denial. So like it had that impact there. When it went to the supervisors, didn't quite go as well as we had hoped. But it's still a great example where even though there was tons of public comment pushing against it, ultimately the supervisors did vote to approve that master plan. And so it's challenging, and it's really challenging work, and it can be gut-wrenching work at times, but it can also be really fulfilling because what we're doing is very mission-driven, and we're trying to make Loudoun County a place where people and wildlife can thrive together. As Nan knows, being here her whole life, like our organization was started in 1995 because we were worried, people were worried about the amount of development happening in Loudoun County at such a fast rate. And that was, and since then it's only exponentially grown in that time period. And so our mission is more important and relevant than ever in our history in Loudoun Wildlife Conservancy. And Loudoun County needs us, and Loudoun County needs people like you all. You are the people who can really make change happen, make your voices heard. And so that's why we're doing this Advocacy 101 series. That's why, donors donated so we could fund a position to have Trinity here, to be able to really educate the public about what advocacy is, because sometimes it's a scary topic. Like people are like, "Ooh, advocacy, I don't know, that's too much." But a lot of what advocacy is just education and connecting with people. And so I feel like most of the people in this Zoom room, like we love learning stuff. We love learning new stuff. We love learning about wildlife and habitat. So we love education. And then connecting with other people is that other component. And that's something where a lot of times environmental causes get kind of caught in the island, and we're like the low cause on the totem pole, and they're like, oh, well, it's just animals. But it's people. Like we are animals and we are people. We're part of habitat. We're a part of nature. So you can't take the personable person out of nature and those two experiences. Like people live in the environment. And so making those connections and making those emotional connections is super important. And there's a lot of stuff that can be done there and training on that maybe that's another future session. But like interpretation, I know somebody mentioned they're in the current VMN class. I know multiple people in here, and myself included, are Master Naturalists as well. And one of those lessons is interpretation. And that's what interpretation is all about. We lead interpretive guided nature walks all the time. You can know all the facts in the world, but if you can't figure out how to connect to another person to those facts, they aren't going to remember them. They aren't going to have that aha light bulb moment. They aren't going to fall in love with the things that you fell in love with, whether it's a tiny little salamander, a fuzzy little fox kit, or like a little fluffy little bird. Whatever it may be, like your passion will come through once you make that emotional connection with somebody else. So with that, I will kick it back over to Trinity, but I just want to thank you all for being here. this is going to be, this, as Shane mentioned, this is an ongoing process. We couldn't do it without you. And we'll learn together, we'll engage together, we'll get more people engaged together. And we'll continue to be successful, and we'll continue to have challenges, and that's all part of the process. But I wholeheartedly believe in our mission, and you all are here, so I believe that you all believe in our mission too. So thank you, and I'll kick it back to Trinity.
Thanks, Michael. That was a really, really good to sum up and examples and everything. And I really liked how you summed up saying advocacy, and it's very core principles is education and connection. I think that's a really, really good way to put it. A very good take-home point. So I'm gonna share my screen again really quickly. I have like 2 more slides. Now that Michael has talked a little bit about what Blood and Wildlife has done in the past and how we practice advocacy and the impacts that we've had in doing so, I just wanted to give you guys a really general overview of some of our campaign spotlights right now, some of our really big fights. Like I said previously, and also like Michael delineated, this series is going to go more in depth going forward about the specifics for these individual projects, so that you guys can actually get some actionable items of what you can do to help. But as of right now, I just wanted to kind of give a little boost to what our current campaigns are right now, as well as give just a general overview as what you can do to get involved in those. The first one that was sprung on us a little bit later in the process than I think we probably would have liked, but you guys might be aware that Dominion Energy has begun the process of applying to put a transmission line through Broad Run. As you guys are also probably aware, Broad Run is one of the last truly green spaces in Loudoun County, and this transmission line that would transect it would definitely impact the wildlife and the natural ecosystem there. So as far as a small actionable item that you guys can do right now, Dominion Energy is accepting comments on this development application process through their GeoVoice system. If you are able to submit a comment, obviously helpful. This Broad Run area is extremely valuable habitat, and advocating on the behalf of those wildlife that live there is incredibly important. If you guys have any specific questions about GeoVoice, if you're not familiar with it, know how it works, or want to just get direct information on how to submit comments, reach out to me and I will give you that information. Next thing, the zoning ordinance rewrite has been an ongoing process that you guys are likely very aware of. I see that there's a chat. I don't know if that's a question or a, okay.
Yeah, just a suggestion for next time.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the next thing that we are doing as for our campaign spotlights is the zoning ordinance rewrite. Like that ongoing process has been going on for quite a while. That's one of our upcoming Advocacy 101 topics, is going over that more in depth in preparation for the next public comment period. Currently, the zoning ordinance rewrite is in between drafts and work sessions with the Planning Commission. Of course, though, they are always accepting general comments. You can always write to your supervisors regarding the zoning ordinance rewrite. The most recent update is available on the Loudoun County website. So again, we will be keeping you guys as specifically advocacy interested Loudoun wildlife constituents aware about it, as well as putting it out there to the general public when that period opens again. And Michael actually already went over this one, but the Route 15 widening project, that the decision was made on the direction of the bypass to go through the J.K. Black Oak Wildlife Sanctuary, which was obviously not the outcome that we were aiming for. However, like he said, this is not a process that is completed yet. It is not over. The design phase is when the actual environmental assessments and enactment will be undertaken. So we will be mobilizing again as that phase gets closer to do our best to continue to advocate for JK Buck Oak and the wildlife there and the protection of that habitat. So yeah, like I said, this is just a really general overview of what our current advocacy campaigns are. And then I also just wanted to say thank you for coming and for helping us protect wildlife by participating in these advocacy things. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I am sure that there's questions and I would love to have a further discussion before we sign off for the evening. With regards to my previous slide or any of the theory that I presented earlier. So any questions, if you want to put them in the chat or just say it out, that's okay, whatever you're comfortable with. Thank you, Tanya.
Yeah, I'll just say it was great, very informative session, and you definitely made advocacy feel a little less intimidating. So between you and Mike, that was really helpful.
That's good to hear. I'm glad you got something from that. And Karen, I just actually got to read your message, so I can send you a reply to that afterwards. Thank you so much for reaching out about it. Okay. Of course, yeah, you're welcome, Leah. Great.
Great. Well, I think we have a lot coming. We have more coming up in Advocacy 101. So this is the first of, as Trinity mentioned, monthly sessions. We're not going to do one at the end of December, right in the middle of the holidays. So that's why we'll kick it back up. We'll have a gap there and then kick it back up in the new year in January. But so we're plotting these out. If you have any ideas or suggestions of topics that you would like to see covered, feel free to always reach out to us. And as Trinity gets more comfortable, like in her role, and meets more people, and learns about all the issues that we have coming up, you'll probably see more advocacy content as well. And then one thing that I kind of alluded to when I was speaking as well is that if you see something that you're concerned about, feel free to reach out to us, whether how we get involved or whether we can get involved. We're always here. We're happy to help, whether it's just giving advice or connecting the dots, or really getting out there and being with you on the front lines. There's a variety of ways that we may be able to help, but we're always a resource here. So feel free to reach out whenever.
And like I said, my email was in that last slide. You can find it on the website as well. I am available for any further questions if you guys want to ask. If you have questions about more specific involvement, feel free to reach out. Like Michael said, both of us are a resource, so please do. Great. Well, if there are no other questions or anything, I will go ahead and hit release. Or I guess I should say.
Thank you so much.
Yes, you are so welcome.